Hey, welcome back to Eric's Camping Adventures. I am just sitting in my Jeep right now, in my garage. I thought I'd share with you a few things I'm doing with the YJ. Now that the fuel line, the basic belt system, transmission, differentials, transfer case have all been maintained, and I know that they're reasonably stable. I want to do some pre-testing, and I'm going to call it pre-testing because there definitely are some things that are not completely right about the YJ. One of those things that I noticed is that the exhaust can at times be just unbearably horribly smelling, and you just don't want to breathe it. I've noticed on occasion it will actually puff some smoke. So we're in the pre-testing phase to come out with some solutions and a plan to get this going in a better direction. So in the background of my video, you are seeing some pre-testing that I did down at the off-road vehicle park below the Keystone Dam outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And while I'm driving around here, I'm going to talk to you about some things that I'm discovering. I did do some other testing, and I got it on the turnpike outside of Tulsa and got it up to 80 miles per hour. That is the speed limit there. And I also took it down to a friend's ranch and drove it around for a bit there, just to assess while he was driving what I could see, especially outside of the vehicle. And that is where I actually discovered the intermittent puffs of I'm going to say dirty blue smoke. So I'm going to give you a few options for that right off the bat. So the dirty blue smoke was a big concern for me because, you know, I was thinking to myself, you've got two things there with that could be major problems with the engine, and that is, one, I could have bad rings. Two, could be bad valve seals. But the actual problems that I think it turned out being were nothing that serious, because I had to kind of go back and anchor myself in the fact that in my previous video you saw that my spark plugs were a nice tan. They were not oiled and fouled like a bad ring. That still doesn't eliminate the idea of a bad valve seal, but I think I came up with a different solution. So one thing I found under the hood relatively quickly was that when I changed the valve cover gasket, I noticed that there was a hose on the back side of the valve cover that was not connected. I also noticed that the air cleaner was sprayed with oil from the secondary connection from the front of the valve cover that came through to vent the valve cover or crankcase. And as I did some research, I found out that the YJ Wrangler has a crankcase ventilation system, CCV, not PCV. I researched it, and that back hose on the back of the motor goes straight to the intake, and it provides a metered vacuum to the crankcase ventilation system. So I drove it after that, and my blue never appeared again after connecting the crankcase ventilation system correctly. It took me a little while to find an actual map for a 93 YJ that would help me to understand how the vacuum system was supposed to be connected, but I did find it. and it seemed to stop the blue. Now, I'm not saying there's not any blow-by the valve seals, but it seemed to stop the blue. So this is pre-testing, so I'm trying to figure some of this stuff out. And I think that there's going to be some more tests along the way to see if we see that blue smoke again. But when I got it up on the highway, going 80, and then drove it around my friend's ranch, it seemed to, in a 2.5-hour ride, appeared to go through about 1/4 of a quart of oil. Now, I wasn't happy about that. So I reconnected the crankcase ventilation system correctly, and I still felt through some of this driving that the actual power of the engine was not where I wanted it to be. So, or I would expect it to be for a 6-cylinder. So I looked at the fuel pump, and then I started to look at the exhaust, and I made a couple assumptions. If there's some blow-by coming by the valves, or the crankcase isn't ventilated properly, then the blow-by is going to be increased. So I was starting to wonder if maybe that horrible smell was my catalytic converter. Still don't know for sure if it is or not, but I did cut off the catalytic converter and the exhaust, and I did replace that. And my catalytic converter did, to me, look like it was partially obstructed. So that might account for some of the power problem. If there was enough oil blowing back over the long term, that certainly could have been what obstructed it. Might have accounted for some of that horrible smelling exhaust. It wasn't like eggs or sulfur like you would expect. It was just like a choking sort of, ugh, what is that? After changing the catalytic converter and the exhaust, I have clean water coming out. I do not have dirty smoke. I do not have that horrible smell. I did have another horrible smell. It was very gassy. So I looked at my upstream, and there's only one on the YJ, my upstream oxygen sensor, and frankly it didn't look like it had ever been changed since 1993. So I just got in there, ordered an AC Delco upstream oxygen sensor, so it's getting accurate feedback about the burned exhaust back to the computer system. And I'm waiting for another test on that one. I'm going to take it back out, and we're going to do a little pre-test and just see how it runs and see if it is running as gassy, or another term for that might be it's running rich. And I think that might entirely clean up my exhaust. I'm hoping. Other things that I quickly noticed was, the shocks are not in the greatest shape. It seems to have some newer ones on the back, some older ones on the front, but the system is, it's not going to have a uniform response throughout. It's got one really bad one in the front driver's side, okay on this side, and then probably better than average in the back. But I want them all the same, and the cost for some new shocks for this vehicle are nothing. So I just went with OEM Monroe's, and boy, I can tell you already the feel is pretty good. I also decided while I was under there to change out the steering stabilizer. It was starting to get oily, especially as of late. And so I changed out the steering stabilizer, and then I put in some disconnecting sway bar links so that I would be able to have a little bit more travel of the suspension to improve my traction and kind of pressure down to the ground with that disconnect. So I was actually really happy with these old tires when I'm driving around. because these old tires were so big and bubbly on this sand where I did this testing. They were just wonderful. Subsequent tests on the sand with the skinnier tires that I put on is not as good, but it also didn't air down, so might have been just fine if I aired down. But the big bubbly tires were dry rotted and they had to go as well. So that is where I'm at right now with this Jeep. I have kind of an unveiling that I will do and a little walk around before we do this late October adventure, early November adventure, and we'll get this thing going. Thanks for joining me for another episode. Come back next time and we're going to do a walk around. Been looking all over for the fuel filter on this thing and I finally found it. Oh my. Between mud, a shield, and rust, here it is. I'm gonna try to pull that thing off of here and see what I can do to put a new one in. Obviously this has not been changed anytime like in the recent past before I purchased this vehicle, so just wonder if I might be getting more power out of it when I change this thing.